How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to LUMIX Live this week. We've got a really exciting stream. Obviously, since we've been out last week, we have had a major announcement for a new lens to the L-mount ecosystem. So yeah, we're going to spend the bulk of today talking about that. But before we dive into that, I want to let everyone know this stream will be ending promptly at 2 p.m. Eastern, or 2 p.m. Central, so 3 p.m. Eastern. And then at 3:15 Eastern, we're going to be jumping over to Discord. So if you don't follow us over on Discord, make sure to follow us over to that platform where we're going to continue the conversation over there as well. There is a link down in the description so that you can join the Discord. Yeah, we have a whole separate set of conversation that we're going to have over there specifically just for the Discord community. So yeah, as I said, we're going to run this till 2, and then promptly at 2 Central, we're going to cut this, and then about 15 minutes later, we'll start up as I just kind of get everything set up over there. But yeah, as I said, we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about today with the 100 to 500 millimeter f5 to 7.1 that we launched for the S series cameras, or based on the L-mount alliance. I have a Sigma 60 to 600 here with me, and I have our 70 to 200 f2.8 that we can take a look at. I want to show you some of the size differences here. If you've been over on the Discord, I've shared a couple of other pieces about this, and that'll be exclusive over on Discord. So if you want to have that side of the conversation, some of the extra content, be sure to check us out over there. But yeah, I know over the last number of months, there's been a lot of people asking about this. You know, what are we doing as LUMIX for a LUMIX super telephoto lens? And yeah, if you've been following the info over the last week, we released the 100 to 500. It's going to retail for $2,099 in the US, and it is a solid addition to our lineup, I would say, at least from the last couple of months of me shooting with it. And hopefully with some of the examples I've got that I can show you today, and some of the actual on-hand use cases that I've put the thing through, y'all kind of see why I'm pretty excited about it. I want to give a fair warning, I am not a wildlife or sports photographer by any stretch of the imagination. I like shooting with long telephoto lenses, but it doesn't mean that I have necessarily the best I'd say technique compared to many that this is what you may primarily shoot with. But we'll go over why I think this lens can be a really good benefit for even seasoned shooters in the lineup. But before we get into all of that conversation, I want to remind you in the United States about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. The Red is for free if you've bought a LUMIX camera and lens or whatever. You bought it new. You can follow the QR code right below me. Get yourself registered for LUMIX Pro Services Red. If you're someone who likes additional levels of service and support, you can always take a look at the Platinum tier. That is paid level. But that's going to get you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You're going to get discounts on out-of-warranty repairs, annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all the kind of maintenance stuff that maybe you don't want to do yourself and would rather have someone handle for you. Alongside the 3-year extended warranty, which is also in the Red program. So if you've just purchased new LUMIX equipment, definitely take a look at it. At least get yourself on the Red. It's free, gets you into the program. So if you happen to ever need a service and support program, you've got an access to that entire dashboard for it. So let's take a look. There were a couple of questions that came in the beginning here that I want to address pretty quickly. So McCary, excited for a new telephoto lens. Yep, I got one right here. Super excited about it. On the GH7, how do you get 4K 120 to have AF and playback in slow-mo in camera? The G9 did this so well. On the GH7, seemed to be MOV, 4K 120, but manual focus and doesn't play back in slow-mo in camera. So, I did just look. Like I said, I finally got my G9 Mark II and a GH7 back, although my GH7 needs to go in for some service. So I did look. The systems are different between these two cameras. So if you're using the slow and quick mode, which is something that's found on the G9 Mark II, this will do a 4K 120 overcranked down to 4K 30p. So what that means is that the output that you're going to get is 4K 30p as an output timeline. You can record at 4K 120 that then gets embedded in pre-slowed down. That system does allow you to have continuous autofocus, and the system will work. The GH7 is different in this case. The GH7 uses the variable frame rate function. The difference here is the variable frame rate function is a bit higher end than the slow and quick mode as far as like how internally it functions. What that means is on the GH7, you don't have the same access. The GH7, if you want to use variable frame rate, it's going to be 4K 24, or 4K 30 to be able to get 120 frame. But you don't have autofocus in that particular. You have push AF so that you can set your focus, record, to be able to then also get the pre-slowed down footage. So if that is something that you absolutely need, is 4K 120 pre-slowed down in camera with autofocus, it's the G9 Mark II. The GH7, like I said, the systems are completely different in the way that they function, so it's not something the GH7 has by comparison to that one in particular. The big difference is, though, is that the GH7 typically can produce a better quality out of the various different modes that it can record at. And the variable frame rate system is designed to provide you more fine-tuning control. So it's not just saying, hey, you only have 4K 120 in the way the system works. You have more options with variable frame rate with it. So it is just a difference. My understanding is that that's not something that's going to change. The GH series has always been its goal, and its target is very specific. The G9 series and the regular G series are usually designed more for photographers that are wanting to do some video, but necessarily aren't going to spend a ton of the time in post doing a bunch of edits, or would prefer to have that kind of slowed down footage with it. So yeah, actually just going through the cameras, that's how the systems work. So you're not seeing anything different than how the cameras are designed to function. And that's probably not what you wanted to hear. But yeah, G9 Mark II, if you want 4K 120 as a output in 30p and have playback in slow motion with AF, it's got to be on the G9 II. GH7 is going to be designed for really primarily more shooting in actual 4K 120 and then slowing down in post, at least the way the engineers designed it. Are there zoom lenses designed specifically for video? Sometimes the zoom operation is stiff to prevent zoom creep, but when zooming slowly for video, stiff zoom rings can cause stutter shots. So this kind of goes in like with the super telephoto lens, right? With lenses like the 100 to 500 here, where you have a manually zooming ring. In general, lenses like this are designed much more in the photography concept when you look at what comes out for native on the mounts. That doesn't mean that there aren't zoom lenses that are designed with video shooting in mind. It's more just understanding that, at least from our perspective, lens like this, 90% of the time it's going to be used for photography. Videographers, one, it's not as common with hybrid cameras where you're going to be wanting to zoom at the same time as recording. Usually it's done where it's either you're manually, physically pushing in or pulling out, or doing a rise or a fall, things like that. On the flip side of that, there are some lenses like the Sigma 60 to 600, which does have a pretty smooth zoom ring. That being said, it's not as smooth, even in this case, as like a proper zoom cine lens, which is going to be much more mechanically connected. So you're going to work much more on, higher tuned cams for specifically managing that zoom range in video. I don't think that's something that in general you're going to see commonly with photography or hybrid oriented lenses, because the costs would end up going up pretty high. It's similar concept to like why you don't see really mechanically parfocal lenses in a what I would consider a affordable price point for the average person. Mechanically parfocal lenses are going to be much more complex to build, which in turn means they're going to be a lot more expensive. Usually they have to be more overbuilt by comparison to modern hybrid lenses or photography-based lenses. And the things like focus motors are going to be way different between the two in how they function across the board. So yeah, you're not really going to find them in photography-oriented lenses. Some lenses are going to perform better than others, especially like when you start looking at ultra telephoto lenses, because most of them are going to be external zooming. So as you start to zoom, you actually build more tension as the front element, because this is a moving component. They are built up to be much more stable internally, but not necessarily to the same level that a cinema-oriented zoom lens would be. How cool would it be to use the onboard microphones of the camera to say what settings you're looking for? It would be an interesting thing, but I will straight up tell you right away, cameras in general do not have processors that are anywhere near powerful enough to do stuff like that from any camera company. So, sorry for pestering you about this, but I would really enjoy a firmware update where you can set a minimum shutter speed in program, aperture exposure mode in video, just like you can in photo. Yeah, I've seen a lot of the conversation back and forth on this. You have to remember that there's going to be a bit of kind of what are the norms for it, right? Doesn't mean that it can't change, but in general, if you're gonna want to set like the certain rules for video, your shutter speed should be double the frame rate that you're capturing at. You shouldn't really be changing your shutter speed that much unless it's a very specific reason to. And if you do something like setting minimum shutter speed, the problem there is that it's designed, anything like that, when you're in program or aperture priority, you are telling the camera that I want to use something else. Shutter minimums start to kind of just go back to that point of, well, just shoot manual, set your shutter speed, use aperture as your main kind of like what I'm controlling for how I want the depth to be, and then your ISO value is going to be adjusting to keep that shutter speed and aperture combo there. So it starts to get into, you can make these things so overly complicated, and for maybe 0.5% of the market that wants to see a certain way that it's used, there are many more important things that are being requested and worked on that affect way more users across the board, and all of those things have to be put into perspective, into priorities, right? A lot of stuff I would love to see being done on the cameras, but I fully acknowledge that it might be something that like myself and a handful of other people may ever use. And if I were to look at that feature versus this other feature and have to look at it and say, well, this is going to affect infinitely more people than this one feature would, yeah, this one's getting priority to be developed. And this one, if we can ever get to it, cool. But we always take the comments in, and the engineers always look at it. If it's something that can be relatively easy and it won't impact anything else with the testing involved to make sure that adding it in doesn't destroy anything else, then yeah. But I would tell you, minimum shutter speed in aperture priority mode for photography, even there, you still do run into the potential problems of, well, minimum shutter speed can be broken. if you don't have your ISO set right or your aperture set right. Happens all the time. I can set a 2,000th of a second minimum shutter speed in stills, but if I don't have my ISO set high enough for auto ISO, it's going to drop my shutter speed. The same thing would happen in video. So at that point, you also question, like, what's the validity of doing it? Because unless you are making sure everything else is in the right parameters for it, it's not doing anything different than the camera would do now. So, yeah. Can support be improved for tethering on an iPad, please? Support is pretty terrible at the moment. If you can describe what is terrible and give me examples, and this is true for anything. I saw a comment on the Reddit or on the Discord channel, someone saying that they wish to see AF improvements on the S1R2 for weddings in low light. Okay, cool. What's the problem you're having? If you don't actually define what your problem is or what exactly you want to see improved, we're not mind readers. We can't guess what it is that your particular challenge is. We also can't troubleshoot it so that if it's, hey, it's maybe just one little setting that you have wrong. Like, it doesn't open that door for those conversations. And that's what evolution of cameras and firmware is the conversation. It's why we do these streams. So, but yeah, as far as the tethering on an iPad, give me an example of what's wrong, how it's not working. Better if you've got an example of where one works, even if it's a different company, because then we can give proof and kind of information into the engineering team to say, hey, there's some people saying this works better. Is this something we can do? And then it gets put into that category of, well, how, on the scale of all the things that are being worked on, where does this fall as far as importance? Okay. Let's see here. It would be great one day if you could do a LUMIX live session diving into the intentions behind each camera in the LUMIX series so we can truly understand the thought process behind them. Yeah, I can look at trying to do that. There's a lot of cameras, so it would take a while to kind of like put all of the information together, but I can look into trying to do it. That might end up being something, and if I can get it done, it's going to be probably more of an end of the year thing. But I'll look into that for you. Could a firmware update be added to be able to update all queue menus in all custom number modes versus still having to update it in each one? Also, focus stacking cannot be set to C1 menu. I'll ask him about that, McCary. 100% I'll ask him about that. I know that we've been slowly changing some of the different ways that the custom modes work, in what can be added in, what isn't added in, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, all right. Let's talk about the lens now. So the reason why we're having the stream today. So, yes, as mentioned, last week we released this, the 100 to 500 millimeter f5 to 7.1. This is the new ultra telephoto lens for the LUMIX lineup. This is from us. This is our LUMIX lens. It is an externally zooming lens, as I know if you've watched any of the videos online, you've probably seen. It has a ring on here for adjusting smooth and tight. It is a very subtle difference here. I think one of the things I've seen, which is actually probably a really good explanation of it, is that it's more for transporting and making sure that, like, you don't bump the ring much. It's not necessarily the same concept as like this one, the Sigma 60-600, where I can put this to a focal length and then I can lock it and then it locks it in place. Two different approaches for the way that works. But just as, let me back up a little. Just to put it in perspective here, I will take my, this is the 60-600, and I just set it to 100 mil. So this is at 100 millimeter. This is also at 100 millimeter. And now you can see very much the difference in size between these two. It's a pretty substantial difference in the size and weight. And that goes to a lot of like why we built it the way we did, why we didn't go for something along these lines, why we went for something like this. If you think about it, we've all kind of seen, right? We want to go super telephoto lens. Maybe we're not fully, not like fully invested in ultra telephoto, wildlife, or sports. But a lot of times we find that, you know, if I have a 70-200, which is right here, you know, sometimes this just isn't enough reach. Sometimes I want more reach, and I don't necessarily have the ability to be like, well, I'm going to walk a few steps forward and be able to get closer to a subject. It doesn't always work that way. You also run into a lot of times where it's like, I don't necessarily want to go with teleconverters, because then it's, I have to attach teleconverter, and then if I don't want it, I have to take it off, so on and so forth. So on and so forth. So that's kind of where some of this came to life, this particular lens. And what I will tell you is, in the time that I've been using it, it changes the kind of idea of being able to shoot super telephoto, even if you're a professional. Because unlike the more traditional, large, heavy, you know, good quality size, good quality super telephoto lenses, those lenses are big, they're heavy. If I want to be able to go out on a trip somewhere and say, hey, I want to maybe shoot super telephoto, I now have to plan and say, hey, I'm going to need to bring an actual bag with me. So I need to have either the carry bag with this, or I need to go to a bigger bag that I carry my camera equipment in. This lens, because it takes up the same size as a 70-200, means I don't have to do that. I can just throw this, like I'll either use the Peak Design, I think it's like the large everyday bag, or I've been using more now the Nomadic Peter McKinnon bag. This can just fit right up in the top of that bag along with the rest of my equipment. And if you jump over to Discord after the stream, I have a couple photos that I've posted of my kit, particularly with this. So that means that I can like take this lens, and if I decide to use it, awesome, it's in the bag with me. If I don't decide to use it, cool, it didn't take up any additional space. And I could still have, like on my last trip, I took S1R2, 24-60, 100mm macro, 16-35, an S9 with an adapted lens, 4 batteries, filters, like all the normal stuff with me, and then I just threw this up in the top. I ended up actually using this lens though, and that's what I want to kind of shift to, because talking about the size and the weight of the lens and all that kind of stuff, like that's cool, but does the lens perform? And if so, how does it perform? Does it actually hold up to, you know, kind of the quality that some people would expect? So to start with, we're going to be taking a look at Lightroom here. So now I know my comments about Lightroom versus Capture One, but Lightroom has a really good comparison tool for this to do side by side. So we're going to use this. So if we look at this, let's take on the left side, we're going to have the 60-600. On the right side, we're going to have the 100-500. Now, I took these images at 100mm, 100, 150, 200, 300, 400, and 500. So I took them at like kind of the main marked points. The only thing is the 60-600 doesn't have a marked point at 500, but in the camera you can watch the focal length move. I also shot all of these at f7.1. This way we weren't changing aperture between either of these lenses, so it is the most wide open that this will do at 500mm, even while the 60-600 actually can open up, I think it's like a third of a stop faster. So in theory, that should mean that the 60-600 at 500 should be better, because you're actually stopping the lens down a little bit. So let's take a look at these just at 100%. Now, the only thing, I'll go in and show you here, the only thing I've done to this is I've adjusted the exposure a little bit just to kind of balance the exposures out. but I can reset these as well and we can take another look at them. So if we do comparison, again, we've got the 60 to 600 at 100 millimeter and the 100 to 500 at 100 millimeter. They're both ISO 400, both 7.1, and both at 3/20th of a second here. So if we zoom in, we can take a look at the image quality here, and we can even go into like 200%. I don't know about you, at 100 mil and 200%, I don't really see a huge difference between these. And also, just to be clear, these were shot on a tripod with electronic first curtain shutter, so trying to make sure that I'm not having anything like shutter induced or anything along those lines. And these were all shot on an S1R2. So not a huge difference here between the two, in my opinion. I think they both look pretty straightforward. Not bad. Perfectly fine for 100 mil. Let's go into 200 mil. So we go into 200 mil. We're loading. Here, again, I'm not seeing a huge difference between these two. Again, these are at 150 mil. They're both at f7.1, both same exposure settings across the board. Your shutter speeds are a little different between the two from the metering. So 2/50th of a second versus 200. That's why I normalize the exposures a little bit. Again, maybe the Sigma has a little bit of an edge on sharpness, but I would call it within margin of error. So let's go to 200 mil. Let's render. So now we're at 200 mil. Here we're at 1/60th of a second. Both have the stabilizer still turned on. Here I'd say maybe the Sigma has a little bit more of an advantage than the 150 to 600 at 7.1. Let's go in. Let's take a look at the next. So this will be 300 millimeter. And again, we're looking at 200% in the zoom here. Personally, I'd say they're probably, again, pretty similar, pretty close to each other. I'm not seeing a huge difference. The only thing I will say that I do pick up on is that I have a little bit more detail in the text under the barcode under this. On the LUMIX lens versus the Sigma. So a little bit of a difference. If that's something hypercritical and important to you. There you go. And then let's go to 400. All right, so we're 400 on there. We're 400 on here. Let's move back in. We'll see at 400 again. Here, I would say the 100 to 500 LUMIX is actually pulling ahead. We have more detail in the text under the barcode in here. The Sigma is a little bit soft. That edge is not really as defined as what we can get on the 100 to 500 on the LUMIX. And then let's take a look at the last one here. This is at 500 mil. And this one, because of how tight we are, let's move the framing a bit here so that we're side by side. And here's probably the biggest difference that I would see. The LUMIX 100 to 500 at 500 millimeter, and remember, this is 7.1, so it's wide open. And the 60 to 600 at 500 millimeter at 7.1, so it's stopped down a little bit. 1/125th of a second on both, f7.1, ISO 400, both on an S1R2. And here I'd say the LUMIX is just way better, way sharper, much better overall image. And again, these don't have any actual adjustments made to it. And to put this in perspective, the distance that I am away from this. So again, let's look at the 100 mil and the 100 mil. This is at 100 millimeter from the position I'm at from my deck. So that is a ridiculously long distance, and it's not a long enough distance that I would say like environmental haze is going to start impacting. Like I'm not shooting across the background here, which is over a creek bed and all the trees and all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to avoid that stuff. And this is from like a third floor of a building. So trying to eliminate as much as I can and give you all a like as clear as an example as I can give you. So This made me very excited about this lens, knowing how much detail I'm able to pull even at the 500 mil. Are you going to put teleconverters on this? Possibly. Some users will. Some people may not. Can I use hybrid zoom with this? Absolutely. If I know that resolution's not a huge component of what I need the super telephoto for, if I'm only going to post on social, I'll 100% use hybrid zoom with this and get out to like 2400 millimeter on an S1R2. And that goes to the whole idea here, right? Is that if we just look at kind of an innocuous, I am sitting here trying to test and trying to push, how does the lens work under these ultra controlled positions, or as controlled as I can get? Does the lens perform better? Cool. In most cases, I would say yes, the lens does perform much better. And on top of that, it's got the benefit that it's lighter, it's smaller, roughly about the same price. But I will always say, what good is more reach in the 6600's case, right? If that is not what I'm going for. And I don't want this to sound like I'm talking negative on the 6600. I love that lens. It's a great lens, but it's a different purpose lens. My biggest thing is I could have the best lens in the world, but if I'm not going to take it with me, what good is that? What good does that lens do me? If I'm someone like myself who does not professionally consider themselves as someone who shoots super telephoto work all the time, I don't really care to have a big, heavy, bulky lens, because I'm going to have to make a choice and say, hey, I need to actually plan to take that thing with me. Where this, again, I was able to just throw it in my bag, and if I was able to take it with me, cool. If not, oh well. I didn't need to shoot those images. It just would have been cool if I, as long as I have it with me, I have that option. Let's take a look at some of the questions that came in while we were looking at those comparisons. Let's see here. What is CAS cable? Connects to the camera, but the storage cannot be read. I'm not sure what that is. I think it's Raleigh. If you can explain what CAS cable is, I can maybe look into it. As a GH7 and G9 II user, I'd like to see a LUMIX 100 to 500 for Micro Four Thirds. The Panasonic 100 to 400 is not good enough. Olympus doesn't sync IS with Panasonic. OM 150 to 600 is too big. 100 to 500 would be ideal. I understand the logic from that perspective. However, I would pose this point to you. Look at how crowded that space is with lenses. How many options there are. How much overlap there is between all of those lenses. And they all have various strengths and weaknesses across the board. Adding one more is not going to make a difference, honestly. The decade I've been on this side of the industry, I can tell you, look, lenses are always looked at and kind of evaluated like, okay, what does this actually offer to the market that doesn't exist anywhere else? If we were to come out with something and be able to have it that would be smaller than like the OM 150 to 600, is it going to be a heck of a lot more expensive? Because when you go smaller, you have to go more expensive with exotic elements and designs. Weights change, all that kind of stuff. So I get the idea, but a 100 to 500 in Micro Four Thirds, which would be a 200 to 1000, you really got to start to question, is it legitimately going to be adding anything to what the ecosystem offers? And if it does, where does that rank against the rest of the offerings in the industry? Or what the requests are. Our Micro Four Thirds cameras are very video oriented. They kind of always have been. Yes, we have really capable stills Micro Four Thirds cameras as well. When you start looking at it under the, kind of goals of a brand, it kind of tells you whether or not you're going to see certain optics just kind of like naturally developed. If there's a big enough need for something and a big enough call from the market, that helps identify to engineers and product planning teams to say, hey, we got a lot of people that are saying that they actually would really like this. That's why if you ever get like a survey from a brand, or you get an opportunity like this or over on our Discord to actually interact with the brand and tell us, one, what is it that's missing in a camera for you? What works? How do you use it? And most importantly, if you have problems with the way things are, actually explain what the problem is. Don't just blanket say like, hey, I don't have X, Y, or Z, or it doesn't, like the autofocus thing I said before. Like, I want my autofocus to work better in low light. Okay, cool. What's wrong with it in low light from your perspective? Because this person's perspective could be different from the other. How you answer, or like how you gave the feedback, is definitely way more valuable, way more impactful to being able to get anything, like any traction. Because you're giving examples of, hey, these are the reasons why I don't like these lenses, and this is why I think this would be a good option for you. The more we can get like that, the more we can have those conversations and try to develop things better in the future for you. So yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm totally dismissing a 100 to 500 in Micro Four Thirds, but I will doubt that it will happen because it's super crowded as it sits. And what is the functional difference between a 100 to 400 to a 100 to 500? Super telephoto range. Every millimeter in super telephoto becomes less and less and less and less and less effective. Wide angle is where every millimeter counts, because you see it more drastically. And typically, there's usually a price barrier for a lot of people when it comes to certain lenses. This lens, very clearly designed in full frame because we're trying to give an option away from the large, heavy options out there. We can do smaller with a lot of the technologies that we've developed with like the 100mm macro and the 24 to 60 with like the motors and things that we use in those lenses. So can we get please get a firmware update to make only 2 audio tracks in the S1II? No idea. Thanks for the detailed answer about minimum shutter speed in video. Don't know if you missed it, but was wondering if there would be a technical reason for the S9 could not receive a cropless stabilization update. I'm not 100% unsure on this, but I don't know if the S9 has the gyro that's required for it, because we need a lot of information. Both gyros in the lenses and both gyros in the camera itself, to be able to understand, where all the components are in relation to each other. And then also you have to look at the sensor itself, how it's being utilized in the different platforms. A good example is that the S1II is a very similar sensor to the S1II as far as characteristics go. As far as the S1II, the 2X, and the S9. It does not inherently mean that they are the exact same sensor. There's different ways that, sensors are utilized. So I would have to double check and look with the engineering team. But I believe first and foremost, I don't think the S9 has the gyro accuracy needed for it. And I don't think I know for fact we're not using the sensors the same way in the different cameras. So like, yeah, there are technical reasons. I don't have an exact one that I can be like, yes, this is why, kind of thing. Most likely is the gyro system. There are also other apps that just do not support Lumix cameras, like Field Monitor, for instance. Yeah, that's up to the camera or the app manufacturers. I don't know any camera brand that actually works with some of those app companies. A lot of them are reverse engineering. So if there's problems with it, you got to talk to those app developers. I discovered a bug in Lumix Lab when using on the Galaxy Z Fold phone in tablet mode. Adding a frame to an image messes up the scaling of the image info. Artist name is partially hidden. That's one I can actually test because I have a Fold as well. Sean, I'll take a look at that as well. Yeah. Hi Sean, how's it been? Just here to drop the Panasonic Premium Compact Micro Four Thirds plus full frame camera with a viewfinder request again. We meet in office hours. Yeah, thanks DJ. All right, let's actually. Sorry, I got something in my eye here. All right, let's actually take a look at some of the stuff that I shot with the new 100 to 500 when I was out on a trip. This was actually out in Arkansas. With the 100 to 500. So I've got the information all up here so y'all can see it. But I wanted to show, kind of like what I was talking about before, talking about the quality of the lens in a controlled environment is one thing, but how does it actually work when you're out in the field, when you're actually using a lens? They can be two drastically different experiences for most people. And I think that's why if you look at commentary that we see online, you'll see sometimes in a studio test products get dogged on. They're like, this isn't the greatest thing ever, this is terrible, or I don't like it, or it falls behind X, Y, and Z because of this. But then when you actually go and use a product, it all kind of starts to make sense. Things start to mesh in either the build, the design, the control, what it gets you compared to, other options in the field. So, like I said myself, I am not a wildlife or motorsports photographer by trade. It is a very entry-level hobby for myself. So, that meant being able to take this thing out just on a hike and just casually capture things that came by was possible in ways that I wouldn't have been able to before. So my wife, dog, and I went out. Like I said, we were up in like the Arkansas area, and we're walking along this creek, or not this creek, this like reservoir thing, and we came across a whole bunch of these dragonflies. Now I have no idea what the names of them are, but these are all shot at 500 mil, so these are fully extended out, and I was pretty freaking close to these dragonflies. So, looking through here, how does it look in real world? Well, if we crop in, let's do 100% crop in. We're looking here. I would say this is pretty dang solid. There's no adjustments made to these images. These are out of camera. These are just in the vivid profile. If we look under details, stuff like that, you'll see this is all default. That's added into it. That's pretty impressive, in my opinion. Being able to actually get good solid detail, especially in the wings. I'm still able to pull out a bunch of the fine details as the kind of wings go in and out of focus. If I go to the next one here, same thing. You also have a realization of, even though these are at f9, just how shallow the depth of field still is at 500 millimeter. It's pretty crazy. But the lens was holding up really solid. We're 500 mil. These are high ISO. These are 3200 ISO. And it was a clear day out. If we go in, came across a deer, animal eye detect, picking the deer out, being able to, again, shoot here. This is f8, 1600 ISO. Again, I think these are incredibly solid and acceptable images, especially from someone who does not have a trained skill in shooting with super telephoto lenses. If you've never shot super telephoto before, it does take a different set of skills. Understanding things like 1/4 focal length rule, even if you're using stabilization on the lens. Understanding how your shutter speeds can affect every little kind of vibration that can happen in the lens. Understanding the difference between what environmental impacts, so like haze and heat and things like that, can cause to an image if you're shooting lower in the horizon. All of that stuff is, I would say, a much more trained skill than if I'm a street photographer, if I'm a landscape photographer. To say that each discipline has very different kind of needs. Usually people find themselves really good at one or two areas and maybe not so great at the other. And I'm definitely in that latter category of, I'm not so great at telephoto photography. But being able to have this lens, being able to shoot with it, knowing that it's light enough that I can hand hold it, I didn't have to bring a monopod with me. And just for clarity for those, I take the tripod collar off when I'm going to be using a lens handheld. This makes things like pretty straightforward for someone who wants to get into this, but maybe doesn't want to deal with the weight, the size, the cost of the really higher end lenses. And really just wants to be able to get that good reach. Because even at 100 mil, it's still a pretty decent range for things like portrait and stuff like that. Some people commenting in the chat here. Let's see here. I use Olympus 100-400 and it's not long and sharp enough. I cannot squeeze 150-600 into my backpack. Reasons are essentially the same as you have stated for L mount. Yes. For L mount, you have two 100-400, 60-600, 150-600, and yet you added a 100-500. In my Micro Four Thirds, 100-500 replaced my 100-400 with a bit more weight. I won't buy panel like a 100-400. This one I would. Okay. By the way, this 100-500 could be adapted with its minimum R&D. That is an assumption that you have no understanding of making. I'm just going to be blunt on that one. It is one of my biggest pet peeves is people that just come out and they're like, well, it would be minimum R&D. You can just adapt it. You don't know. I don't know. Are you an optics engineer? I'm not an optics engineer. So the idea that, well, this lens could just be adapted and dropped over here, it if anything, it diminishes the fact that optics engineers are highly trained and highly educated in what they do, way more than any of us that talk online or actually use a lot of this gear have. So I find a little issue with that last comment that you have. The rest, fully understand the point there. Just please don't assume, and this is for all optics manufacturing, just don't assume that it's like, oh, well, you can just, it's easy. It's minimal R&D. None of us know that. And that's something that only hurts the industry if we keep making those assertions, especially when we don't know. General question, is there a specific reason some telephoto lenses are white and some are black? Like the Sigma and LUMIX ones, or is it purely stylistic? So, there is and there isn't a reason. So, if you look at traditionally, super telephoto lenses were usually painted white or a very light gray for two main reasons back when I was in retail in the DSLR days. One reason was identification, especially with things like the Olympics and major sports events, things like that, because if you saw a whole sea of white lenses, you would immediately know which camera brand those lenses were. They were all actually a really light gray, but so that was one reason. There is always a marketing reason for it, right? The other more technical reason was back in the day, really long super telephoto lenses, if they were painted black, could have a pretty serious problem where elements would crack inside of them because of thermal expansion. Because the super telephoto lenses, especially the really high-end ones, were built to such tight tolerances and high quality that, if you ran into you're sitting outside and your sun's beating down on the lens starts to expand because there were all metal lenses at that time. And you could crack elements, your focus motors would get all wonky, the alignments would get all wonky, stuff like that. So they would paint them white, and yeah, it just kind of went off that way. As material sciences have gotten better, it's kind of changed the need as much for it. There are still some benefits. Really big super telephoto lenses, a lot of times white optics will also kind of help with some of that, things like thermal expansion, depending on what materials the lens is made out of. If you look at a lot of the most modern design lenses, they're mixing metal and polycarbonate in a lot of different components, or they're using metals that are maybe a little less prone to heavy thermal expansion. They're maybe a little more resistant. They can operate at higher temperatures. Tolerances are changed, manufacturing techniques have changed. So when it comes to the more modern stuff, I think that's why we don't see it as prevalent in the non-ultra super telephoto, like premium, high-end lenses, the ones that you would see like at the Olympics. The other things that happen, like lenses like what we have here, is we've developed technologies that help with some of the other problems. So stuff like focus accuracy changes with the temperatures, the operating temperatures of the lenses. Focus elements, the tracks that the linear motors or a stepper motor, whatever it is, they're on tracks, and those have to be usually lubed. There's some sort of lubrication that allows that, minimizes friction on the elements. There's lubrication used in certain components like the stabilizers that allow or reduce drag. So as the stabilizer has to move, it can move more freely and as expected. Starting with our 24 to 60 and then now into the 100 to 500, we also added in a new optic encoder that also helps us optically understand where the focus motor is in the stack so that it can be more accurate and we don't necessarily have to go to different designs. So ultimately, it's all just more about material design has changed, quality has improved, tolerances have changed, performance metrics are very different than they were years ago. So you'll see some companies will hang on with the white lenses because of either marketing or brand perception, like brand recognition. Others, if we've never had white super telephoto lenses or light gray super telephoto lenses, so why start now? If there's not really a reason for us to do it, and it would just be aesthetic, there's not really a reason to do it outside of that, at least with the way we design. So let's just get back to some of the stuff here. So using these lenses again, a lot of times, like when we design lenses to be very pragmatic. I think it's fair to say across the board with our brand, we are a very pragmatic brand. That means we're very, let's actually just use the tool, and it's a tool. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most, sexy looking thing in the world, because it's a tool. You're buying this to use it to capture images. It's not necessarily how the thing functions or looks, right? Or I'm sorry, it is how it functions, not necessarily how the lens looks. But when you start bringing in that I can just bring this with me and I don't have to think about it, it changes that perspective for a lot. So for someone like myself, again, I know this may sound a little like self-deprecating, being able to go out and capture images like this, like how much detail I can get in the wings. Obviously the higher ISO you go, you start to lose a little bit of detail in the actual lenses on this Dragonfly's eye, but the color, the depth that you get out of it, and then every once in a while you get like that one, kind of like killer shot that you're super excited about. And, I'm able to get one. I don't know if the compression on YouTube's going to bring this in, but I have all the little detail in this Dragonfly's eyes. I've got all of the other kind of information, kind of filling in here. I have detail in the wings. And most importantly, if I were to actually go in and do a little bit of an adjustment to this, literally just throw auto on this, check my white balance so that it's in daylight, it just immediately can make that lens pop, or that image pop. So it's not as much effort that I have to really throw in to get a solid image. And then for those that like how's the bokeh look, just a quick shot of some ferns here. And if I just throw it in auto, just bring it up a little bit. Let's make sure that I adjust the white balance here. Again, I've got really good detail here. I'm not one that ever really notices chromatic aberration or longitudinal stuff like that. It's just I don't have an eye for that stuff. But, I look at how does a lens actually function in the hands out in the field. Is anything that I see in here distracting to me? Is it taking my eye away from the composition, the image? And I don't find any of that with this lens. Even into doing some basic, wildlife birding shots here. Let's just do some exposure edits here. Again, and this is all with the S1R2. This is with the wildlife or the bird, animal eye detection tracking here. So lots of control, lots of good look on it. This little bird, which apparently I found out was relatively hard to find in this region. Some guy pulled us aside and said, "Hey, did you get a picture of that bird?" And I had no idea what it was. little adjustments being able to come in here and just how much detail you can actually get out of this image. I think sometimes we also look at maybe too clean of an image these days. Like, we think noise is the most terrible, absolute awful thing in the world. I come from shooting film. I'm used to having noise or grain in an image, so a little bit in there is not going to be a big thing myself. Big thing for me myself. But knowing that, like, I can take this is 6400 on the S1R2. Knowing I can take this, I can come in and just do like, all right, let's just denoise this real quick. Let's use their AI denoise. Now, I am using this standalone Lightroom Classic. I think the mobile does this a little bit faster. But let's just clean this up a little bit. Cool. There you go. I still kept a lot of that detail. And that was shot with this lens. So when I hear in some cases like, oh, when you get, having to shoot really high ISOs and stuff like that, it's like, well, one, I don't think the noise looked bad in this image, personally. I think it gives character to the image. I can just click one button and I can adjust some of the noise on here. Technology has gotten so good with a lot of our stuff that, like, let's just actually use it to our benefit. Yeah, as FC says, like, personally, I like the noise in my images. I like having a little bit of that kind of detail in there. Discord. Cool. All right, we got like 4 minutes, and then we're going to shift this conversation over to Discord and continue it. Again, I've got the link down in the description so we can continue over on Discord, but I do want to show one other thing. The super telephoto lenses like this, so this is the, with dual IS2, so this is going to run the highest stabilization effect that we can get. This also opens up the ability to do, some more creative type shots, like being able to come in here and do a long exposure, a quote unquote long exposure handheld. So this is f16, 1/6 of a second at ISO 80. Being able to handhold this and be able to get that effect. I think sometimes we overlook how useful super telephoto lenses can be for not just birding and wildlife. Almost to the point that, let me see if I can pull it up quickly here for you. I have to open up my Lightroom mobile catalog for this. Almost to the point that how many of you, and actually this would be a good question for those of you in the chat, how many of you would ever use a super telephoto lens for things like landscape work? Is that something you would think you would, potentially use or see? A lot of times people don't. A lot of times landscape work is one of those things that kind of gets, kind of just pushed to the side with super telephoto lenses. But I will tell you, super telephoto lenses can make an amazing tool for more kind of creative types of photography. So these are 2 landscapes that I shot last week out in Henderson. Did my stream... did I just lose my stream? Or am I back? Am I back? Nope, I've been live the entire time. Sorry. Everything froze in YouTube on the back end on my side, so sorry about that, y'all. All right. All right, so let's cover this real quick, and then we're going to jump over to Discord. So, yeah, super telephoto can be a really cool use for landscape work. Being able to come in and take some of these really cool, kind of compressed landscapes, isolating things out that you wouldn't necessarily see. But, like, again, being able to come in here, this is, again, S1R2. This is with the 100-500. This is at 165 mil at f11, 80 ISO. I added some noise into this. This is the 65/24 aspect ratio. Coming in, a much cleaner looking one. Again, same things, 100 ISO. But then even going into like more creative stuff with this, right? This is at 100 mil, right? And stopped all the way down. This is f/29. Being able to use these lenses to get a much more creative look. It doesn't always have to be wildlife and sports. It can be, you know, dramatic, like portraiture type work, things like that. Yeah, you just get a lot of cool experiences. So I think ultimately the cool thing is that this lens opens up a ton of different capabilities for users that may not necessarily think to go with super telephoto at their first jump. 70 to 200s are great. The 60 to 600 is an awesome lens if you've got the space, the weight, the determination to carry larger optics around. And maybe that's a lens that eventually you evolve to after something like this. But yeah, like I said, I will talk more about this over on Discord. So as I said, we're going to, if you haven't already, join us over on Discord. The link should be down in the description. Let me double check. Yes, our link is in the description right below to join us over on Discord. I will drop it in the chat. And then at about 15 after, in about like 10, 15 minutes, we're going to be live over on the Q&A portion for Discord. So definitely join us over there. If you didn't get an opportunity to ask a question, you can ask them over there. You can drop them over in the suggestions channel. Other than that, yeah, we're going to end it over here on YouTube and we'll jump over to Discord. Thank you everybody for tuning in, for asking questions, listening to me ramble about this lens. Like I said, I'm really excited about it. If you're interested in the lens, it is available for pre-order. You can take a look at your retailer near you. Yeah, we will be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on LUMIX USA with LUMIX Live. Later. Bye, y'all.